Episode number 68 of Making the Case. Fact or fiction? Does it really matter? Let's get it. Hey, what's going on, YouTube? It's once again your gracious host, Dr. Jacob Isom, educator, author, speaker, entrepreneur, content creator, consultant, father, a little bit of everything back at you with another episode of Making a Case. We're on episode number 68, and I have another great installment for you. So we're talking about fact or fiction. Does it really matter? And before, of course, I get into my monologue, let's go over our two channel norms. One, we'll take points and not people, and then two, we won't do all the cussing derogatory things because we're professional over here. All right. So fact or fiction. Now, let me briefly let you know what we're talking about. Okay. Let me get into my opening statement. So it is of my opinion, my most humble and gracious opinion, that when it comes to truth or non-truths, fact or fiction, believe it or not, that it really doesn't matter, right? It's really how it moves you, how it inspires you, how it really motivates you to do what's right or continue to do what you shouldn't be doing, right? And that can go to the power of myth, right? Well, we understand myth is a story, it's created. We understand the power of story. We know that when it comes to a lot of different aspects in our culture and our society, that we know for a fact that things aren't true, but it still influences us nonetheless. All right. So that is why the topic for today's show is whether or not the truth really matters, because at the end of the day, it's going to move you one way or the other because we're such an emotional people, right? And that's the reason why story is so effective, right? Whether it's little kids or whether it's adults, right? When you hear a story that contains emotion in it, it gets it. You pull your heartstrings, right? Look at what movies do to us. Look at what songs do to us, right? So we're such an emotional people that at the end of the day, like, it doesn't matter whether or not something is real or not. Um, we're gonna be affected by it just simply by our emotions, right? So that's kind of what today's episode is going to entail. We're gonna touch on it from a couple of different angles. Of course, when it comes to actually literal works of fiction, and also we're going to talk about story, and we're just going to talk about it in general. Does it really matter? And of course, we'll probably touch on it from a religious angle, as well, because it is my humble opinion once again that it doesn't matter if a God exists or not, right? We believe it in our minds and in our hearts. That's all we need, right? We don't need tangible evidence, right? Think about the stories in the Bible, right? People living in Wales and parting of the Red Sea and miracles and turning water into wine, right? It doesn't matter if these things actually happen or not, right? People believe them, and that's all that matters, right? If somebody think you cheated, doesn't matter if you cheated or not. The effects from it you're gonna feel, and it's gonna be real, right? So now I may make the case that the fact that we don't believe, or let me say this, the fact that we're not as moved as much by truth and fact, how it can harm us, how can it can distort our reality. Now I would probably make that case, but at the end of the day, I mean, we're going to be moved by more things that are not true than are true, right? There are way more things on the internet and social media that is fabricated, that is just over the top, that people are going to believe. It's way more of that stuff. It's way more fake news than it is real news. And they get people in the uproar, right? And get people all in their emotions. And that just kind of is what it is. And we've got to a point in our society where that is the norm. So we're gonna touch a little bit of everything in our 4 pieces of evidence. So stay tuned. We about to get into it. Without further ado, let's get into our first piece of evidence. All right, so here's my piece of evidence number one. I have an article from the Neiman Lab. Never heard of it. First time using this resource. And the title of this article is "Even If It's Fake, It's Real." Okay, so they're gonna kind of make the case or make the point that I'm suggesting is it doesn't matter if it's true or not. That hey, it's gonna move you one way or the other. All right, so let's get into it and see what they have to say about this. It says, in the end, they spark important conversation about important topic, and those conversations don't feel lessened if and when the original story gets undermined. A couple years ago, my friend Michael Sippy coined the brilliant phrase, even if it's fake, it's real. He was referring to a possibly fake Google Street View image making the rounds of an in-progress childbirth. Sippy explained that regardless of whether truth lies and there are 4 distinct potential outcomes, not just 2, it doesn't affect the entertainment value of the image and that we should embrace this new uncertainty. That's an interesting point, that we should just embrace the fact that we don't know whether or not something is real or not. So we just go with the story. It's going to entertain, because at the end of the day, people love being entertained, right? That's kind of where we are. So that's an interesting viewpoint that they kind of off the rip have come up with. So let's keep reading. About a year ago, the Manti Te'o story began to break. The mainstream cover mostly focused on the catfish angle of it and painted him as an innocent victim, while scrappier sources like Deadspin produced subplots involving friends who may or not have been involved, their prior criminal activity, and the possibility of this being a cover up for homosexuality and a repressive religion, among many possibilities. To this day, I don't feel like we know or will ever know whether absolute truth lies in the story. I don't know if a lot of you are old enough to remember the Manti Te'o story, the guy that played for Notre Dame, real big player, ended up going to the league, but his career was just never. He was never the same after the story broke. But that was the real first big catfishing scandal case we really heard of. I can't remember if the MTV show Catfish was before that or after that. Probably was after, but because it's been probably 20 years now. But that was the real first big catfish story of somebody pretending to be something that they really not. And of course, we still have that to this day. It's even worse with AI and filters and things of that nature. Like, so that kind of goes more into the fact that like people are literally trying to create an image of themselves that's not true, right? But the problem with that is that when people find out who they really are and what they really look like, then it becomes entertainment to all of us, right? It becomes a story, right? With halfway truths and all that other stuff. So it's just a big mess, to be honest with you. Over the past few months, I've seen an increase in stories that seem outrageous on first read, spread like wildfire. Days later, get dubbed a hoax, and eventually, while different information end up in some sort of ethical gray area between the boundaries of truth and fiction. There's the famous twerking video hoax reveal of Jimmy Kimmel, and the never-ending story of Andy Kaufman's death, and the anti-gay waiter tip hoax. Slate accusing BuzzFeed of not fact-checking the awful fifth-class Passion the Story hoax, and just recently the telemarketing robot that might be fake. But with additional digging, no one is really sure, so it's tough to say. And most of those stories I've never even heard of, if not all of those stories that they just mentioned. So I'm not always up on things and I don't know if I want to be honest with you. So I'm up on the things I need to be up on. Let's say that. I consider myself media savvy with decades of sniffing out the truth for my own edification and running a news savvy community of over 60,000 users. And still, I find myself feeling duped, confused, but also strangely mildly entertained at the same time. The rise of the 24-hour news cycle and the stresses of news department to post the latest attention grab are combining with the churn of rumors and tips coming out of Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, plus the emotional twist of Upworthy and BuzzFeed to make unbelievable stories a near daily occurrence, with fact checking failing a bit by the wayside. And I don't know if you've been following my channel for a while. I did a episode on journalism and like essentially like is this ethics in journalism anymore? And what they're kind of getting at is the fact that, well, it's hard to be ethical because so many people are coming out with news who are not journalists, who haven't. It's almost like with education. There's so many people coming into the classroom with not being educators, not being traditionally trained as one, where it's like you see the ramification and effects of it in education. I think the same thing is happening to journalism. Now you get people who are retired athletes and people who are content creators coming and spreading information and things becoming news, and it's just blurring and muckying up the waters. But I mean, this kind of where we are, right? And there's no going back now, right? We in the online dating phase. We with AI, with like, I mean, we in just a whole new reality, which I dub this the technology age, because like our whole world has been turned upside down with technology. So I mean, it kind of is what it is. Let's go on to finish this out, though. The natural reaction is to harden, to move beyond more skepticism toward defaulting to distrust without going overboard to humorously cynical. Yet at the same time, these strings of story are offering increasingly complex outcomes and mid layers of truth and untruth that only get uncovered in bits over time. In the end, they spark important conversation about important topics, and those conversations don't feel lessened if and when an original story gets undermined. I don't know about that. In 2014, I see no decrease in this trend. I imagine this pattern of storage spread through social media into the mainstream, dubbed hoaxes. Then finally, dubbed more complicated than that, will start to become a fairly common part of the news cycle. At the same time, I don't see myself grappling with hoax fatigue. Instead, I'm starting to appreciate the spectacle and pattern of this new flavor of breaking news and realize in the end, even if it's fake, it's real. And that's sad, because this is a sad reality that is just upon us, right? The fact that even if it's fake, it's real to a good bit of people. Now, some people are going to question it without a doubt when they first read it or when they first see it, but some people are going to be like, oh man, really? Wow, that's crazy. And then guess what they're going to do? They're going to go and tell somebody else, right? And it's going to be real to some and fake to others. So that's kind of where we at. So I don't think it really matters whether it's real or not, because some people are going to believe it. Like, just think in your personal life, in your circles, at your job and stuff like that. You hear rumors all the time about people. Some of it's true, some of it's not. And now you got to decipher. If you care enough about it, you got to go do the digging and the research yourself. Me, I don't really care that much, but some things I do, but most things I don't. All right. So, all right. So that's our first piece of evidence. We're going to move to our second piece of evidence to continue to make the case of fact or fiction. It doesn't really matter. Let's get it. All right. So let's get into our second piece of evidence. So we're talking about fact or fiction and does it really matter? So we have an article from Writer's Digest. And the title of it is literally, is fiction more powerful than truth? Which of course I believe it is. So, or, and maybe not more powerful or just as powerful, right? Just as influential, may be a better word. So, so let's get into it. See what this article has to say. Sometimes it's nice to be reminded how influential writers really are. Fiction can be more effective at explaining global issues than factual reports, according to a recent study by a team from Manchester University and the London School of Economics. That's interesting. The study says that books like Calais Hosseini's The Kite Runner have arguably done more to educate Westerners reason about the realities of daily life in Afghanistan under the Taliban and thereafter than any other government media campaign, advocacy, organization report, or social science research. And I hope that the information is historically accurate that's actually in a book, because that's always helpful. What they call historical fiction, right? That you kind of embellish things, but you actually use some facts as well. Just like movies, writers in certain movie scripts do that as well. So I can understand how that can be very impactful because people love fiction, man. So I think more than they love nonfiction, and it says that based off of book sales, right? So that's another point to make my case. But while a segment of the news might hold our interest for a moment before becoming part of the day's information overload, the characters and scenes from the books we love stay with us long after we put them back on the shelf. I admit that when I see or read a report from Afghanistan, the picture of everyday life that was so vividly painted in The Kite Runner does immediately come to mind, not a substitute for current event, but as a context in which to view them. That's interesting as well. That said, I cannot imagine having learned more about a woman's life in Iran from a novel than I did from Azaz Nafasi's Reading Lolita in Tehran and Memoir and Books. The study doesn't seem to take into account readable and grossly nonfiction as a part of the picture. Um, and that's kind of that's all of the article, which is interesting. But yeah, but that's an interesting take because I do believe that, you know, when it comes to reading books, fiction books, I believe is when it comes to looking at movies, like they really capture our attention. The imagery that without seeing images, right? The images that we can create in our mind just through reading can take us different places. And that is the importance of picture books for kids when they're younger, right? So the power of fiction and the power of reading, I know for me, like that was the reason why I used to always love to read because it takes my mind somewhere else that I don't have to physically be, but mentally I can go there, right? So that's what fiction does to us, right? And when we hear the truth, it really bores us. That's why I also do believe that a lie is way more entertaining than the truth. We say all the time, I want to hear tell me the truth. I want to hear the truth. But at the end of the day, come on. The lie is way more entertaining. Like we put way more of a spin on lies, right? The truth is just bland. Like Steve Harvey talk about it all the time, how you should be lying. And the thing about it is he jokingly said, but I know he's being honest about that. Because I always again, I also always say, like, what would our world look like if everybody told the truth 100% of the time? We couldn't imagine it because that world has never existed to us or for us. So it is what it is. Whether it's fact or fiction, it's a toss up. All right. Let's get into our third piece of evidence. All right, so we get into our third piece of evidence, fact or fiction, why it really doesn't matter. I have an article from NPR. I've heard of NPR before. I don't believe I've ever used them on our platform before. And the title of this, How Stories Connect and Persuade Us, Unleashing the Brain Power of Narrative. So now we're about to go a little scientific on you as we often tend to do on this channel. So let's get into it. Let's see. Dang, what did I just do? Bear with me for a second. All right, here we go. When you listen to a story, whatever your age, you're transported mentally to another time and place, and who couldn't use that right now? We all know the delicious feeling of being swept away into a story world, says Liz Neely, who directs the Story Collider, a nonprofit production company that, in non-pandemic times, stages live events filled with personal stories about science. You forget about your surroundings, she says, and you're entirely immersed. And I think, to be honest with you, that's what going on vacation does to us. Like for us to kind of reset mentally, get into another place. So when we do get back to our normal grind, that we can feel a little bit more, at ease with things and not overburdened. So it's a lot of things. Think about it. That's why a lot of us use drugs. Let's just be honest, right? That's why the chemicals in the food that we eat impacts us, right? So somewhere along the line, something, the stimulus that is out there is actually doing something to our brain chemistry, and it's keeping us kind of up and down, right? So depending on the story you're reading, watching, or listening to, your palms may start to sweat. Scientists find you'll blink faster and your heart might flutter or skip. Your facial expression shift and the muscles above your eyebrow will react to the words, another sign that you're engaged. A growing body of brain science offers even more insight into what's behind these experiences. On functional MRI scans, many different areas of the brain light up when someone is listening to a narrative, Neely says. Not only the networks involved in language processing, but also neural circuits, too. One study of listeners found that the brain networks that process emotions arising from sounds, along with areas involved in movement, were activated, especially during the emotional parts of the story. And this is why in education and teaching in all levels, right? This is the important story. This is the important when you're talking about engaging people, engaging others, and we can even take it on a personal level when it comes to relationships. Because a lot of time, what is a complaint that you typically see in marriages or a long-term relationship? That people get bored, that people are unhappy. Well, it's because they're not engaged, right? They don't do the things that keep their brain active so that they can connect with one another. Message. All right. Let's keep reading. As you hear a story unfold, your brain waves actually start to synchronize with those of the storyteller, says Yuri Hassan, professor of psychology and neuroscience at Princeton University. When he and his research team recorded the brain activity in two people as one person told a story and the other listens, they found that the greater the listener's comprehension, the more closely the brain wave pattern mirrored those of the storyteller. Brain regions that do complex information processes seem to be engaged, Hassan explained. It as though I'm trying to make your brain similar to mine in areas that really capture the meaning, the situation, the schema, the context of the world. And that's why it makes sense when people talking about a vibe, a connection, right? Getting married, two people comes one, right? Maybe we're talking about brain symmetry, right? Because at the end of the day, whether it's you believing in a higher power or you being happy, sad, emotion, everything literally stems from the brain. Brain patterns, brain habits, right? Brain chemistry. So this stuff is actually important. All right, let's keep going. Other signs turned up interested activity in parts of the brain engaged in making predictions. When we read, brain networks involved in deciphering or imagining another person's motives, and the areas involved in guessing what will happen next are activated. Imagine what drives other people, which feeds into our prediction, help us see a situation from different perspectives. It can even shift our core belief, nearly saying when we come back out of the story world into regular life. So something that can be imaginary, then we come back into the real world. So literally, what I'm getting from this is like we often go in and out what is real and what is unreal, what is seen and what is unseen, our emotions and what is factual, right? So once again, it goes back to a balance. I talk a lot about balance in life, right? So you're gonna be up sometimes, you're gonna be down. But if you can keep things stable, hey, that's how I think you can live a very functional and happy life, in my humble opinion. That's my new statement word now. Um, Perspective is important. I actually have a course coming probably next couple of months on perspective. I also got one on power. I may have told you this before, but it's coming soon. So definitely I'll keep you in a loop on that. So listeners in turn may keep thinking about the story and talk to others about it, she says, which reinforces the memory and over time can drive a broader change in attitude, which I believe that stories does help long-term memory retention. So different formats of information, lists of facts, say, or charts may be better suited to different situations, researchers say, but stories wield a particular strong influence over our attitudes and behavior. In healthcare context, for example, people are more likely to change their lifestyle when they see a character they identify with making the same changes. Um, Antidotes can make health advice personally important to a patient, she finds. When you hear or read about something you identify with, who has taken up meditation, for example, you might be more likely to stick with it yourself. Story can alter broader attitudes as well, Green says, like our views on relationship, politics, or the environment. Messages that feel like commands, even good advice coming from a friend, aren't always received well. If you feel like you're being pushed into a corner, you're more likely to push back. That makes sense. But if someone tells you a story about the time they too had an end to a painful relationship, for example, the information will likely come across less like a lecture and more like a personal truth. And that is so true. Oh my gosh. Like, no one wants to feel like they're being lectured to, right? No one wants to feel like somebody is preaching to them, like they're being criticized, ridiculed, and things of that nature. But if you put it in a story format, if you have a certain tone, if you make it personal, like to yourself, it's like, hey, this is what I've been through, or I heard somebody else went through this. Like, people are more likely to listen, not only listen, but retain it, and they're more likely to actually change their behavior because it's like, man, that makes sense. When you put it that way, that makes sense. All right. So I thought that was a very one of the most powerful articles that we've actually read on here, about how the brain. So this is just brain research, right? Which I love to do a lot, when it comes to brain research. So this is talking about just how literally how our brain activates when it comes to story. So and it can be some truth in their story, and it can be some embellishment and not true. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because you're going to be affected one way or the other. All right. So let's wrap up this episode and get to our fourth piece of evidence. Let's go.
The reason why people cannot accept the truth is because they have been living with it for so long, they don't even know that the lie isn't the truth. And what I mean by that, I like to think of it like the nose. Okay, so your nose. Did you know that our eyes actually stare at our nose all day? Like, we can see our nose, but our minds mentally block it out. This is what we're living with. This is the lie that we're living with. We have it here so long that mentally it's blocked out. So now if somebody said, you're staring at your nose, I think it's a lie because I've been living with this for so long that what you're saying, I disagree with. I can't see my nose. The reason why people cannot accept the truth.
All right, so there you have it. That was my last piece of evidence, my fourth piece of evidence, and I want to show you that video because I absolutely agree with the fact that we have been living with the lie for so long that we can't tell the difference between what is truth and what is not. And at this point, my argument, my case is it doesn't matter anymore, right? It doesn't really matter what is true or not, particularly when it comes to outside agency and outside forces. And what I mean is when it comes to what the government is doing, the New World Order, the Illuminati, or stuff like that. Like, a lot of people believe that this stuff exists and don't know if it exists, don't know who's a part of it, who's not, don't know if it's made up. It doesn't matter at this point. Like, a lot of people believe it. And the reason why a lot of people are going to believe a lie because a lot of people, it just too okay. I was about to be harsh. I was about to say a lot of people are too lazy and just don't care. Which, to be honest with you, that is the truth. But a lot of people just really don't care about doing the research themselves and really doing the digging and investigating to find out, well, what is really true and what's not. So a lot of times you have to depend on the information givers. You have to depend on the news. You got to depend on other news cycle networks. Now, of course, you get, people online that's giving a lot of information. You got some networks that, have more integrity when it comes to news and some that don't. So now it's all about a matter of who you want to believe. So it, there is no, really, it's hard to separate now what is fact from fiction. And it's going to move you one way or the other. You're going to feel some type of way about something. You're going to believe what fits. It's confirmation bias, right? At the end of the day, you're going to believe what fits your own narrative, what fits your lifestyle. So at the end of the day, that's why I don't mind. You know, I was going to tell somebody this the other day and just decided not to, but like I can right now in 2025 come up with my own religion, my own God, get people to believe with me, and that should be acceptable, right? But that's what can happen because that's what's always happened. Information run things, always have and always will. Money is just a tool to put people in different classes. See, I'm not even going to get into that conversation. All right. So what we gonna do here before I get started, we're gonna end this episode, man. I hope you got something from it. I hope you learned something, Hope I learned it. Yeah. But as always, man, I appreciate you. Hopefully, you stayed throughout and watch what I had to say on the topic. But you're always welcome to support the channel by liking the video, commenting, subscribing as always, right? The links for my handles and website where you can get my books and stuff, you already know where it is. So man, hey, as always, I'm you, you are me, love always eternal. And remember, the worst thing you can do is lie to yourself. And I believe we just made that case, baby. All right. Deuces. One love.